Good evening. Please take your seats. Thank you for joining us tonight. My name is Jenna Burbidge, and I'm a Program Officer at the Chicago Council on Global Affairs. Welcome to this evening's program, How Effective is America's Middle East Strategy? Before I introduce our speakers, please take note of a few housekeeping remarks. Today's event is on the record and is being live streamed. We always welcome social media engagement, but please silence your phones. The Council is an independent and nonpartisan platform, and views expressed by individuals we host are their own and do not represent institutional positions or views of the Council. Thank you to our members in attendance today. Your support is critical to our work. If you are not yet a member, please consider joining. We have a wide range of levels for you to choose from. And in the spirit of basketball season, you can also join the Council for 25% off. And this deal ends today, so make sure you do that. You join today. Use the code SWOOSH19, 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 when joining online. This offer is only valid on students, individual sponsor, and donor memberships. If you have any questions, please contact our membership team at membership@thechicagocouncil.org, or please visit one of our wonderful young professional ambassadors who are sitting right there. This program is part of the Lester Crown Center on U.S. Foreign Policy, and we would like to thank the Crown family for their support for this initiative. Later, we will be taking audience questions from the room and online at chi.cnf.io, and that link should also appear on the screens. Now, it is my pleasure to introduce our speakers this evening. Ambassador Ryan Croker is a diplomat in residence at Princeton University and a senior fellow at Yale University. He has served as U.S. ambassador to Afghanistan, Iraq, Pakistan, Syria, Kuwait, and Lebanon. The list is endless, and has had assignments in Iran, Qatar, Egypt, and Washington. And he is also the recipient of the Presidential Medal of Freedom, the nation's highest civilian award, along with many, many, many other awards. Danielle Pletka is a Senior Vice President of Foreign and Defense Policy Studies at the American Enterprise Institute. She is an adjunct professor at Georgetown University's Walsh School of Foreign Service and was a senior professional staff member for the Middle East and South Asia at the Senate Committee on Foreign Relations. The discussion will be moderated by Brian Hansen. He is the Vice President of Studies at the Chicago Council on Global Affairs. Previously, he was the Director of Programs, Research, and Strategic Planning at Northwestern's Buffett Institute. So, ladies and gentlemen, please welcome our speakers.
Terrific. Thanks you all for coming, and thank you two for coming this time. We had originally scheduled this program during the polar vortex, and I'm happy to say that you may have noticed there are actually daffodils blooming this time of year. So on that optimistic note, we then proceed to talk about the Middle East. The title of this panel or this discussion is How Effective is America's Middle East Strategy? And certainly the Middle East has been in the news a lot. There are a lot of events that are happening there, including recent elections. The Trump administration has made a number of statements, tweets, and policies that affect the region, including just recently recognizing or naming the Iranian Revolutionary Guard as a terrorist organization. If you look at this administration and the things that it's doing in the Middle East, before we get to how effective it is, let's start with the question of what is this administration's strategy to the Middle East? And I'll start with you, Ambassador Croker.
Oh man, you are asking the wrong guy. Well, I knew this was coming, so I actually did look for it. Brian, it's not there. I just would give you one slice on that. The administration has talked a lot about confronting Iran. exporter of all things evil. I couldn't agree more. I've survived some of their worst stuff, like when they blew up the American embassy in Beirut in 1983. So by all means, let's get on with that. So how are we doing it? Our first bold move to confront Iran was to close our consulate in Basra, southern Iraq, right on the Iranian border. So we are going to put it to the Iranians. We are going to get away from anywhere near where we could really mess with them. And then in the same leak in which they leaked that we were going to cut our civilian staffing in Kabul by half. That's all part of our very clever strategy to kind of suck the Taliban back into Afghanistan, where we can, really put it to them. And and that means, since we got to cut these positions in Afghanistan now, we'll do the deep chop in Iraq in 2020, where we were also going to slice the civilian contingent in Iraq at the embassy there by another 50%. So, any way you want to look at this, at least as far as I can see some isolated, generally fairly counterproductive steps, but if we're connecting the dots, they don't spell policy or strategy.
Terrific. Danny.
So when we talked about when we did our sort of pre-conversation about this event, Brian said, I'm really hoping to tease out some differences between you and Ryan, and he wasn't able to actually tease out any differences between me and Ryan, and so that's going to be boring for you all, but I apologize. Let's add to your list. What about Syria? This is, and has been, by the way, since 2011, the greatest opportunity to hit the Iranians probably in their biggest foreign policy priority, which is the maintenance of the Assad regime in Syria. And what are we doing? I couldn't tell you. We're drawing down troops. We appear to have absolutely no notion that this is important to the Iranians. We are handing Syria off to the Iranians, and we should give the administration a little bit of credit. One bit of credit that I think they deserve is that the president said he was going to rip up the Iran deal. He did rip up the Iran deal, and everybody questioned whether he was going to be able to put in place the sanctions regime that existed prior to it. I would say that they have exceeded with bells on any expectations on that. They've really, really hit the Iranians hard. I was telling a group earlier today that I saw a tweet yesterday someone tweeted to Hassan Nasrallah, the head of Hezbollah, that they would be willing to sell their kidney if it came to that in order to raise money for Hezbollah. The Iranians aren't able to pay Hezbollah or the IRGC or their own troops. They're in a very bad financial place. But to what end? I mean, sanctions are not an end in and of themselves. They are a tool of foreign policy and of a theoretical strategy. What is it? We can really go country to country to country, but if you want to talk about the priority of this administration, which the president has repeatedly said is Iran, then we're giving up on the encirclement, right? Basra, Afghanistan, etc. We are giving up in Syria, and we have no follow-on to this success that the president has managed to achieve in the post-JCPOA era.
So that was pretty condemning of the lack of strategy in strong terms, but it also strikes me that this is not entirely new, right? The Trump administration, as you just diagnosed, may not have a strong strategy, but many people say the same thing of the Obama administration. So how long has it been since the United States has actually had a coherent strategy toward this region?
Who do you want to answer?
Go ahead, you can kick it off.
So I would say that we haven't had a strategy in the region since the Bush administration. You can criticize the Bush administration's strategy, you can not like it. I certainly did, and I think that the Bush administration's strategy was more rhetoric and less execution. But I like the rhetoric better, and the rhetoric contained some notion of what we sought to achieve. The Obama administration was characterized by exactly the same problem that we see now, which is really no end game. You know, we saw that the Arab Spring broke out in that era, and yet there was really no idea about what to do with it. There was no idea about how we might achieve more democratic aims in the region. There was no sense that we needed to rethink old alliances, except that we needed to dump the Sunnis and start hanging out with the Shiites, which is again not an end in and of itself. And of course we saw that the president had red lines and then didn't want to execute them. This is perhaps the most damning thing you can say to Donald Trump. Your foreign policy looks an awful lot like that of Barack Obama, in the Middle East at least.
So let me elevate that some thousands of feet. First, I would agree absolutely with Danny that there's good news and there's not so good news. The good news is important continuity on key national security issues between the Obama and Trump administration. There really are, and Danny's enumerated some of them. The bad news is Obama took us onto very dangerous ground, backing out of the world, and Trump is accelerating that backing out of the world. Why is this important? So we're 75 years after the end of World War II and the beginning of the American era in world affairs. We designed the post-World War II structures like the United Nations, San Francisco Conference, Bretton Woods, the International Financial Order that took the world off the gold standard. We conceived of these things, and then we led the world in them. Sometimes for better, sometimes for worse. But Democrats and Republicans alike saw America's role as global leadership until President Obama. So if you look at his Atlantic interviews called the Obama Doctrine, it's tongue-in-cheek because there is no Obama doctrine unless don't do stupid shit can be construed as a doctrine. And that is pretty much the same path that President Trump is on. This scares me. Not so much about the Middle East alone, although what happens in the Middle East doesn't stay in the Middle East, as we saw famously on 9/11. But look at Europe. We led in Europe starting in 1945. We supported moves like the steel and coal community of the 50s and later the European Union and NATO as means to keep free Europe together and moving in a good direction. Now, not so much. Why is this a problem? Horrific things have come out of Europe. Truly horrific. 2 world wars and the Holocaust came out of Europe. World War II and the Holocaust are still in living memory. Do we honestly think things like that can never, ever happen again? Well, you might look at some of the rhetoric coming out of European countries. Frankly, it scares me. So are we ready to say American leadership is done? Let's just shift back to the great power rivalries and the balance of power concepts? Well, that's what brought us 2 world wars. So it's not that I stay up nights worrying that the Chinese are going to take our place in the world. They're not. I stay up late at night worrying that nobody is, and we are heading down a very dark tunnel.
So let's start right there and think in the context of this region. What should that active U.S. role be in the region today? Let me start with one of the things that the Trump administration has done, which you both referenced, which was to put Iran right at the center of their policy, expressing concerns about Iran's actions in the region and raised a number of serious concerns about that. Is that the right focus for the U.S. as it thinks about policy in the region? Or in today's world, what is it that should be the focus that we would build a strategy around?
Thank you for letting me take this one, the hard question. Look, the problem is there isn't an easy answer. There isn't just a cookie cutter answer for this. There isn't well, if we just solve Iran, then everything in the Middle East will fall into place. Each part of the Middle East has its own intrinsic problems, and they're not generic. Okay, Syria has its own problems. Lebanon has its own different problems from Syria, although very much intertwined. Israel and the Palestinians have their own problem. Frankly, Jordan, although we never talk about it, has very serious problems. Egypt, we have President Sisi, the new President Mubarak, in town in Washington this week. I mean, that's a disaster waiting to happen. We all know what's going on in Saudi Arabia, Yemen, Iran, Iraq, and each of these are not, you can say that Iran has played a malign role in the region, and they have, for sure. But Iran plays a malign role in the region because Iran has been given the opportunity to play a malign role. It is all of these regional, local conflicts. It's all of these sectarian fights. It's all of these, these things that, frankly, your eyes would glaze over if we start talking about the grievances of the Yemeni people. But it is those grievances that have been allowed to fester that are the reason why the Iranians, the Russians, Al-Qaeda, ISIS, all of the Salafi jihadis, and all of the interventionists have got a foothold in the region. And the right way to address this is actually to sit down and figure out how it is that we can move towards solutions in these countries. It's not to figure out where we can afford to invade next. Because you let these problems fester long enough, and then you have to invade, and there's no consensus in our body politic behind that, or in our public behind that. So this is the boring work of what foreign policy is meant to be. I try and say to people, this is what State Department, if we only had a State Department, and AID and all of these instruments of American power are meant to work on, so that we don't have to use the Pentagon. But there isn't one magical answer.
And there could be several answers. Danny, you just sketched one out. The economies. We've seen the reporting. The Iranian economy is in a bad place and looks to get worse, to the extent that they are cutting salary payments to their proxy militias, including Hezbollah. So we need to think strategically about it. We know their weak spot. It's their economy. It might be, for example, that sanctioning the IRGC, the Revolutionary Guards, as an organization has behind it a logic at getting at the IRGC's economic interests. This is IRGC Incorporated. I'm not sure that's the case. I'm not sure they've given it that kind of applied thought. Even if they have, and this, again, you just said it, it takes a lot of hard, methodical, boring work to make these things actually have an impact. You got to go through a lot of detail, work with a lot of other people to get that done. And this administration is terribly understaffed. Out of 6 regional assistant secretaries in the State Department, we only have 2 that have actually been confirmed by the Senate. Everybody else is acting. Half of our embassies don't have ambassadors. That's where, at Washington and abroad, that's where the hard, gritty work gets done that's outside of the public gaze, or at least we try to keep it that way. And we don't have the people to do it. Similarly with Russia. It's interesting to watch President Putin try to play, if not the commissars, at least the czars, that role. That costs money. And if the Iranian economy is bad, the Russian economy is probably worse. So how do we drive up the price for them? They want to play in Syria, Iraq, Venezuela. Have at it, guys. It comes with a price tag, and here's how we're going to run that meter on you. That actually worked with the Soviet Union. So I could see the raw material here of a strategy of identifying who our regional and global adversaries are, what are their weak points. We've certainly found one for Iran and for Russia. Let's turn that into a calculated policy. Let's bring others on board with us. And let's see if we can just bankrupt them. Now, maybe that works, maybe it doesn't. What concerns me is that I'm not sure I see the strategic thinking there behind it, and I know I don't see the plussing up of the administration. So you got the gals and guys who can do the trench warfare on this to actually bring a policy to fruition. It's just not there.
So one of the things that's striking in both your answers is the importance of specific situations, right? And not a sense that there is a single overall strategy probably to respond to the region in a coherent way. So, how effective is the Middle East strategy? Could be misplaced that a Middle East strategy is the answer to this. But certainly there are some problems and some challenges that are more important than others, and some trends more important than others in the region. And one of the things, as you both know well, that policymakers face is which ones to prioritize and what to focus on. So putting you again in that constructive role of looking at the region with all of the challenges that exist there, what do you think should be among those priorities? What are the most important situations that we should be addressing? I'll let you do that. Brian, go ahead.
Well, it's an absolutely essential question. The greatest power on earth, which is still us, in spite of our best efforts, cannot do everything everywhere all at once. We can't. You do have to prioritize. If you're looking at threats, I think that's pretty clear. Who poses an existential threat to us? That would not be the Middle East. It would be Russia and China. They have the nuclear capability to destroy this country. They would destroy themselves in the process. But the point is, let's take the big picture here. Venezuela does not have the capacity to destroy the United States. Russia does. So by definition, I think you've got to have your focus on these near-peer rivals, if near is the right modifier. If you look at it regionally, it kind of one flows from the other. So I would say our three regional priorities would be Europe, East Asia, Middle East. Again, East Asia and Europe, well, my view, I differed with Secretary Rumsfeld on the odd thing or other. The old Europe versus new Europe, I think he may have been onto something. But the old Europe I see is the one that scares me. It's not that they are, in the dustbin of history, which I think was his characterization. Old Europe, to me, constitutes the Europe that brought an unimaginable level of human loss and suffering to the entire world. So Europe, number one, East Asia because of China, number two. The Middle East, once again, it doesn't have the capacity to annihilate us, but we really don't want to see another 9/11 again, which is why I think we might actually want to stop talking to the Taliban, who were the hosts that brought us 9/11.
We're going to get there.
But that's just us.
Having been in government, it's kind of fun because I actually know how hard it is when you're in government, trying to get hard stuff done under difficult circumstances with idiots for bosses and all that kind of thing. And then you got some gadfly out there like Crocker chewing on your ankles while you're trying to do something constructive. So I get all that, and that's the fun part. But the reality is you got to sit down and have that conversation. If you take a look at the national security strategy, which is good, it is unfortunately not tethered to any known form of reality.
What do you mean?
In the sense that it exists in its own space.
It isn't resourced?
It is not resourced. It is not discussed. The administration has drawn, I think, absolutely nothing from that strategy to say, here's where we're going.
I think that's a little bit. I think it's a little bit unfair. I do think that there's a sense in the administration that and again, we have to look what they do, not what the president says. And I know that that's a distinction that's sometimes hard to make. What they do is actually much more tethered to that national security strategy, which is a recognition of the challenges that are I think, coming from Beijing and from Moscow perhaps a little bit less priority on Europe. The problem is, as you rightly say, we can't do everything, and that we certainly haven't resourced the Defense Department. And you know, when people like us talk about resourcing, the automatic assumption is, oh well, of course you want to resource the Defense Department so we can go and kill people. And the answer is no. Actually, we for 70 years, well, let's just say 50 years, believed in deterrence. We believed that our power was there to stop people from doing bad stuff so we didn't have to go to war, not to arm us up so that we could go to war. And that concept appears to be completely sort of lost on everybody. That's the great power problem in the Middle East. Just to bring it back to that. Look, what we ought to be doing. For me, what we ought to be doing in Syria is we actually have an area of Syria that is peaceful and under the control of our allies and people we work with, and those guys are actually not terrible. They're not Salafis, they're not Al Qaeda, they're not Assad, they're not Iran, and they're a mix of the Kurdish groups and the Syrian democratic forces. And what we ought to do is we ought to say, Assad is not going to be the leader of Syria. We are going to work with whoever the leader of Syria is, and that we should begin to set up and work with the Syrians to have some form of actual administration on the ground. That has happened at the local level, but it hasn't happened at a more serious level to present a sort of political challenge to Assad. We don't really, much as we did with Venezuela, we've kind of hit the end of a road right now on our Venezuela policy. But if you look at step by step what we did up to now, those are good things. We built an alliance. We have regional support. We have more than half of the countries in the world that recognize the now legitimate leader of Venezuela and have relations and are talking about giving him economic opportunities. Why should we not try to do something like that in Syria? Why do we want to just allow Assad to insinuate himself back in order to reenact, and mark my words, we will reenact the last 8 years again once Assad establishes himself with the support of the Iranians and the Russians. So that would be one thing that we absolutely need to do. On Iran, I think, again, we've got a good beginning policy, but I don't know what our end game is. I think part of the problem here is that there are two aims inside the administration on Iran. The president's aim is to get Ayatollah Khamenei and his team to the table. And this is his kind of dirty secret. He said it, but that's really what he wants. He wants to do a Kim Jong-un with the Iranians and do a better Iran deal. Because he's such a great deal maker. And the rest of the administration doesn't want to do that. His national security advisor doesn't want to do that. His secretary of state doesn't want to do that. We don't have a secretary of defense, so I can't say what he wants to do. But there's a real problem. What is our policy leading towards? We appear to have a regime change policy in Iran, but ding, 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 I'm a big supporter of the Iraq War. You got to know what you want in Tehran afterwards. We don't have that. We haven't begun to work on that. We've just got the squeeze on. And so those are two things that, to my mind, are immediate. The last bit that I'll talk about, which is exactly what Ryan is saying vis-a-vis the Taliban, is, probably you don't want to get in bed with, Al-Qaeda light, which is exactly what the Taliban is. And we need to have some sort of strategy to solve the problem in Yemen. The Congress wants us to squeeze the Saudis, failing to understand that squeezing the Saudis doesn't solve the problem in Yemen. We need to also squeeze the Iranians vis-a-vis the Houthis. Because right now, the people who don't want to come to negotiations to solve Yemen are not the Saudis, not the Emiratis. It's the Houthis who are in control. This tiny 4% of the country that is in control of the capital and a large swath of Yemeni territory. And before you all sort of yawn and begin this, oh my God, Yemen, who cares about Yemen? The answer is, In Yemen, we have one of the most potent al-Qaeda branches, al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula. I'm not going to tell you about what's going on in the African continent because that will scare the pants off of you. But just talking about what our remit today, in Yemen, we need to prioritize getting some sort of stability on the ground so that we can continue to target those bad guys. Sorry, that was really long, but we are solving the Middle East.
Which is fine. And I want to address one of the issues that you've both mentioned, but take it on directly, which is our policy in Afghanistan, which, as you pointed out, the U.S. is involved in direct negotiations with the Taliban, and presumably in order to negotiate a future state in Afghanistan that would allow the U.S. to withdraw its forces. Seems to be what the goal of this is, with some sort of stable power sharing agreement, which can carry that forward and allow us to leave Afghanistan. You've both already expressed less than enthusiasm for that policy and that approach. So share with us kind of what are your concerns about what's happening?
Well, in Afghanistan, the Taliban, shortly after they lost control of the country, said they'd be more than ready to sit down with the United States to talk about the future of Afghanistan, but not with the puppet of the United States, the illegitimate government of Afghanistan, so-called. We consistently refused any contact on those terms until we decided it was a good idea. And the only possible rationale I can think of for finding that a good idea is that we have determined, the president has determined, we're done in Afghanistan. Let's negotiate the best terms of surrender that we can, kind of like what we did with the Vietnamese in Paris in the early 70s. And then just let's get the hell out. We're done. Because that is what is going to happen. This delegitimizes the Afghan government, and it has got to be demoralizing to a huge extent the Afghan military and police who are out there fighting and dying every single day. Kind of hard to get your troops out of the trenches and moving forward when they have just heard about round 7 of the U.S. Taliban talks excluding the government of Afghanistan, and they're supposed to be ready to fight and die for a government that clearly isn't going to be around much longer. So it is I kind of hope that is their intention, because if it's not their intention, that would be even worse, that they would not have been able to connect those very basic dots. That's what we're looking at here. And I have written on this. It's something I personally feel very strongly. What will be part of the collateral damage should it go that way? And oh, by the way, the Taliban will be perfectly ready to agree to anything we say we want. Power sharing, whatever it is, they'll sign, because once we're gone, and we're not coming back, and they know it. It's Afghan females, girls and women. Right from the beginning, a major part of our post-2001 Afghan strategy was the education and empowerment of women. We built girls' schools. I was in beginning of January 2002. I mean, the embassy had been open like a week. We had our first girls' school up with 12-year-olds in the first grade class, along with the 6-year-olds, because the 12-year-olds had come of school age when the Taliban took over. No female education. We encouraged them to run for parliament. We encouraged them to join the military, to be entrepreneurs, to be in government, and they stepped forward. Implicit in that was, we got your back. And now we're kind of saying, that was then, this is now, maybe not so much, things change, and goodbye and good luck. Well, these women are going to get it in the neck, in some cases literally. So I just find it not only a major strategic mistake on our part to effectively renegotiate the return to power of the Taliban, given 9/11, I find it a betrayal of our most basic values, and not just amoral, but frankly immoral. That's not who we are. That's not what I like to think of as Americans being.
So let me just respond, because I think there are some folks that would share your concern about the women in the region. And the argument that they might make is, yes, I hear you, the outcome isn't going to be good, and there is going to be suffering, and that's horrific. Don't support it. At the same time, we've been on the ground for 18 years in Afghanistan. We have tried to support and develop a stable government that's capable of controlling the country. We have not succeeded in that. There is no end in sight to this commitment. And since we're not making further progress, we need to find, as distasteful and as serious as the consequences are going to be, a way to be able to withdraw and end something that is not making any positive progress. That's not only the Trump administration, right? There are others in the
Obama
community.
administration wanted to do the
exactly,
same thing.
the Obama administration, kind of traditional realists, the offshore balancing types that say this is not really where we should be. So there are serious people who make these arguments, right? And it's in full recognition of the challenges that would be created and the price that we'd be paid. But how do you respond to those folks who say, how long are we going to do this? We're not making progress. Are you committing us to an indefinite, unlimited commitment in that region? How do you respond to those kinds of concerns?
Well, those are the kinds of concerns that I hear voiced by people who have spent very little time outside the Beltway, like actually being in Afghanistan for any length of time. Or I could translate that outside the loop, Look, does Afghanistan cost us? Of course it does. When I was there as ambassador, 2012, we had about 110,000 troops in country. Right now, we have about 14,000. Has the country taken a huge nosedive as we've drawn down to that extent? No. Kind of rocking along about where it was, which is not a terrifically great place, but I think it's tolerable. The Taliban control not a single one of 34 provincial capitals. They've held them for a day or two, and then they've been beaten back. They do not control the major roadways. You wouldn't want to be on them at night, but they have not been able to affix that permanent presence there. Are we having casualties? Yes, and I've stood at enough ramp ceremonies, and a lot of things really frost me off. One thing is being criticized for arguing that we have our own national security to look after here, and this is just too much and too hard by people who don't even know what a ramp ceremony is. A ramp ceremony, for some of you who may not know what it is, this is where we say goodbye to a fallen trooper on his or her last trip home, coming out of Bagram, going to Dover. So I kind of know about that. And yet I think, while every life lost is a life too many, this is a reasonably inexpensive insurance policy to be sure we don't get another 9/11. If we can keep the government moving generally forward, if we can get Afghan troops in the field with a force level of 10 to 14,000, plus some additional thousands from NATO, I think as a nation we should be ready to pay that price.
There's another aspect to it, and I agree with literally every word that Ryan just said. Amen, absolutely. But there's another aspect to this as well, which is, when you don't have a fully successful strategy, it's one thing if you're in Vietnam and you've got hundreds of thousands of troops and you're still taking major casualties. Although I don't want to relitigate the Vietnam War here, we could probably have this argument about that too. But when you're not doing well, maybe the time has come to reassess your military strategy rather than turn tail and leave. And this is the weird thing that I kind of not understood from successive administrations, which is, we're not fully achieving our goals here. Maybe we're not doing something right.
maybe we need to reassess what our military strategy is, and maybe we need to embrace a slightly different military strategy. We have been doing the same thing in Afghanistan for 18 years, and that's one of the reasons why we are at a sort of a low boil of success. But we haven't been able to seal the deal, and we'll never seal the deal. The Pakistanis are going to make sure of that, right? And there's enough trouble in Afghanistan. But the thing that perplexes me is exactly what perplexed me in the withdrawal from Iraq in 2011, which is, guys, we've seen this movie before, and we know how it ends. Do not recreate the exact same circumstances on the ground that were there prior to this and expect that the outcome will somehow be different. Al-Qaeda, Salafi jihadi movements are just waiting. There's a reason why we haven't had a successful mass casualty attack on American soil in 18 years. It would really be awesome to keep it that way. That actually requires effort. The bad guys are still there. And by the way, we do a ton of work on this at AEI, and it's gotten boring for people to talk about, Salafi jihadi. So much more fun to talk about Mohammed bin Salman and something new. But the reality is these groups are capable, and they are morphing in ways that are very, very dangerous to us and to our allies. And we need to pay attention rather than deciding that their enablers are people who we really could be doing business with to the detriment of the government we once supported. So
So we have not generated disagreement, we've generated a lot of passion. And the Middle East is good at passion, and I need to start sharing this conversation with other people in the audience. Who'd like to, there's plenty we haven't covered, so let's get this conversation started right here with Avi, please. There's a microphone coming so that people online can hear and people in the room can hear. Right up, sorry. Yeah, I'll come right to you next.
I'd like to get back from Afghanistan to the Middle East. And my question is, what's going to be the Kushner proposal about the Palestinian and Israelis? Even though we may not know it, what should it be?
I of course have seen it, and I've waited to come to Chicago and to share with you what's in it.
Breaking news here at the council.
So, I can only tell you what I suspect. Part of the challenge is there's a good thing. I do not criticize Jared Kushner for coming at this and trying to find a solution. And people who do, I think, aren't really interested in solutions. There's nothing wrong with somebody who isn't a professional foreign policy practitioner trying to bring some expertise to this. In fact, there's a long history of America having special envoys who come from outside the field. They're able to bring fresh thinking, and I think it's completely fair to say that our peace processors of the last X number of years have not actually met with success, just looking at the ground. That being said, you do need to know history in order not to repeat it. And I worry that the magic that I suspect that Mr. Kushner and some of his allies inside the administration who are working on this think they're going to bring isn't real. What do I think it is? I think it's an outside-in strategy. I basically think it's a strategy whereby we and the Israelis peel off everybody else and basically present the Palestinians with an ultimatum, which is, okay, we're all on board. You're the only outlier. You need to come to the table, and that Kushner's done gotten to a lot of effort to get the Arab countries to sign up to something like this. That is a guess. I don't actually know. The problem here is a very, very simple and a very straightforward one, which is to have peace between the Israelis and the Palestinians, and to have the outcome, which is a guaranteed security for the state of Israel within determined and secure borders. You actually do need the Palestinians to come to the table. And that's the one thing that this administration has not actually appeared to recognize, because the Palestinians aren't at the table and have no intention of coming. And I suspect at this moment, Abu Mazen, in his 14th year of his 4-year term, has no intention of coming. What do you think?
Well, on the Palestinian side, to say there's a leadership void would suggest it's hard to use leadership in any known concept of the word right now. In terms of the U.S. role, here's one of the things that worries me. The Trump administration took a very dramatic step in moving our embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. Long advocated, presidential candidates have repeatedly said they'd do it and repeatedly have not done it. This president did. What worries me about it? As far as I can tell, it was in no way part of an Israeli-Palestinian peace strategy. Had that been the effort, we would have seen some other things. You would have seen a presidential phone call to the Prime Minister of Israel saying, Bibi, I'm doing this thing. I know it means a lot to Israelis. I know it means a lot to you. So I'm prepared to do it. But here's what I got to get from you. That phone call never took place. So we have taken a step with ramifications that we have really no way of foretelling, but it wasn't to spark a new initiative toward Israeli-Palestinian peace. So we kind of gave away the big one. We gave away another big one, maybe not quite as big, but the statement by the president that on the Golan, that he supported the Israeli position. And now we're seeing a speculation that in the final hours of the campaign, when Bibi was not sure he was going to make it, he talked about extending Israeli sovereignty over parts of the West Bank. Should he do this, and I'm not at all sure he will now that he's in the seat, President Trump would have boxed himself in. Because having done it on the Golan, if Israel then moves to do the same thing in the West Bank, what's our justification for not supporting them? So, you know, it's a big, complicated world out there, and even the small parts are really complicated, like Israel-Palestine. You got to think these things through, and you've got to staff these things up. That if you're gonna put this on the table, it needs to be part of a coherent process with an end in view, a policy goal in view, that you're prepared to slog through the swamps on until you can get it over that particular line. And I don't see that here. So, you know, I think it'd be great if Jared Kushner could provide that strategy. I just don't think he will.
Terrific. The gentleman right here, please. Yeah.
Couple of things. Number one is, if you wanted to ask President Trump about his strategy in the Middle East, don't listen to what he's going to answer. Watch where he's going to turn to Israel. The American policy is Israeli policy through the United States for many years. That's one. Number two, I was astonished with you covering all this huge geographic area, which each of these countries can take weeks to talk about. But what astonished me was that if Palestine was in Europe and it was occupied, to give it to some other people to take their land and make a state, and then for that state to become expansionist and take the remaining part of, in this case, Palestine, besides Golan Heights, besides Shab'a Farms in Lebanon, and having a terrorist militia settlers, 650,000, that they have not been denounced, nobody's talked about them, and had this been in Europe, all the conversation now would have been on that.
Terrific. I understand where you're going. Would you guys, either one of you, want to respond to the relationship and the policy alignment between the U.S. and Israel and concern about the Palestinian issue?
Well, we see this sort of nasty trope all the time. Jeremy Corbyn says this kind of thing. I mean, U.S. policy is U.S. policy under Donald Trump. He's the president of the United States. U.S. interests are aligned with Israel's in the sense that Israel is a democracy and that Israel is a country that we support. You know, you can make these claims. It's not a hugely effective line of argument, to my mind. I think there are very valid criticisms to make of the Trump administration and of every administration. Let's be frank. But parroting the Israeli line is not one of them. After all, the Congress was the one that passed the Jerusalem Embassy Relocation Act, not Donald Trump. And you know, look, this is a big challenge, and it requires a lot of fresh thinking. The problem for me is not. You won't be shocked to hear this. The problem for me is not Israel. The problem for me is the Palestinians. I'm so profoundly concerned about the fact that Palestinian life has declined dramatically under the Palestinian Authority, that Abu Mazen is an unbelievably corrupt and irresponsible leader, and that I went to a group of friends who follow closely Palestinian politics and said, who's next? Who's the next generation? Who's the next group of people who are really going to be transformative for this important group of people? And they said, dunno. Because the current cadre has spent so much time trying to ensure that group of people doesn't have any power. It's really kind of depressing. But, you know.
So I want to bring another subject onto the table you haven't talked about that was submitted as an online question that a number of people wanted to know about, is what is America's relationship with Qatar like now?
That's you.
Yes. The mouse that roared. So you really need to, if you're going to operate in these spaces, you really have to understand the view from those spaces. It's often very different than the view from Washington, to put it mildly. So Qatar in recent decades has defined its regional policies as anything that is in opposition to the Saudis. Al Jazeera, the infamous TV station, would be a case in point. Their two principal targets are us and Saudi Arabia, not in that order normally. At the same time, they have been a vital partner to the U.S. and the U.S. military in particular, as we have moved into the Afghan and then Iraq and later Syria campaigns. There is a huge facility at El Udeid, southern part of Qatar, a major American military base that has been absolutely essential for our prosecution of all three of those campaigns, Afghanistan, Syria, and Iraq. To have done it without Udeid would have driven up our costs hugely and reduced our effectiveness hugely. I led the negotiations to get that base agreement. The strategy we agreed on, state, DOD, Central Command, was that we would ask for the moon. The Qataris would whack 20% of it off, and we would still have one hell of a good deal. So Hamid bin Jassim, then the foreign minister, came to Washington to do the deal. We delivered about 125 pages of our desiderata to the Qatari embassy. And basically we were saying, you're going to pay for absolutely everything, including the fuel for our aircraft. You will have no access to the base. We will not inform you in advance of any operations we are going to conduct. We're not even going to inform you of operations we have conducted once they're over. So you pay everything, we tell you nothing. Deal? The next morning, the foreign minister comes in with aides, staggering under this weight of paper. They plop it on the table, and he says basically, okay, I just have one question. Is this everything, or is there other stuff you're going to want as well? And I was kicking myself. We could have asked them to fund operating costs of our largest military installation in this country at Fort Hood, Texas, forever. And he would have said, where do I sign? Why? Because that's the insurance policy against Saudi Arabia. They know it, we know it, the Saudis know it. So they can, initiate some kind of blockade or whatever that is not going to affect the Qataris really in the slightest. But everybody knows we got to have that base. And I got to tell you again, as someone who was very much involved in that negotiation, had they said so explicitly at the beginning, I would have nodded my head and signed anyway. We really did need that base.
It's paid off for them immensely.
Yeah.
I mean, it really has. That's one of the reasons why we're not coming down harder on them for the intra-GCC rivalry that's going on right now.
Yep. They, again, we were talking about insurance in the case of Afghanistan. Well, the premiums on their policy are a whole lot more than the premiums on our policy would be if we go that way in Afghanistan, but they're more than ready to pay the premium.
Amazing.
Perfect. I'll move to the other side of the room and the question right here in the second row.
Hi, I'm Dr. Naseba Yunus. I'm an Iraq expert at the European Institute of Peace. I wanted to ask you about the impact of sanctioning the IRGC on Iraq, particularly given that the Iraqi parliament has been debating whether to ask for the withdrawal of US troops. Do you think this could be a damaging development? And overall, do you think it was a good move?
You may have a different view. We haven't talked about this. I think it was a good move. I couldn't actually understand the sort of fuss around unprecedented. The behavior of the IRGC is unprecedented. It is a terrorist sort of mastermind organization that is masquerading as a country's military force. They run Hezbollah, they run the Houthis, they help run Hamas. They are operating in Syria, and of course they run the Hashd al-Shabi, the popular mobilization units in Iraq. So I actually think that the administration was fine in doing that, and I think it was probably an accurate designation. I hope it helps in Iraq. I don't think that's what the strategy was. I don't think what the thinking was. I think that the thinking behind it was the IRGC is not just a military entity, an elite force within the Iranian military, as you know. It is also a large and very important business. And it has, as sanctions have hit Iran over the last 20 years, it has taken up the slack. If you want to think about it this way, imagine to yourself that the Army Corps of Engineers had a side business. So they were the #1 and successful bidder on the Iranian metro system, on the addition to the Iranian Tehran metro system. They, through Khatam al-Anbiya and a whole series of other companies, many of them on the Iranian stock exchange, on the Tehran stock exchange, are a business. And these sanctions will go after that in ways that are very meaningful because a bunch of people have actually become pretty rich. The problem is that in Iraq, what I would love to see is that this is actually a way to also squeeze the IRGC managed popular mobilization units, which are really playing a dangerous role inside Iraq. And of course, you know Iraq better than I do. And I'm not sure that that's going to happen. We should be leaning very hard on the Iraqi PM to get these guys, ensure that they don't turn into Hezbollah, basically, because they're well on the way. I mean, what do you think?
Yeah, look, again, I'd like to see us maybe listen more and talk less. In this particular case, how about if we had gone to the Iraqi government, the prime minister, someone we know quite well, a very able and very thoughtful individual, to say, here's what we got as a problem set. Here's one step we think could help. sanctioning the IRGC and all of its members. How could we then work this with you to diminish, if not immediately eliminate, these popular mobilization forces, which we all know are as much against you, the Iraqi government and state, as they are against anyone else, certainly not ISIS. That kind of conversation would have been great if it took place. I kind of doubt that it did.
We don't have anybody who's dealing with Iraq.
Exactly, and that, again, gets at that problem. Now, does that mean that we are in a bad place getting worse? No, not at all. You can still backfill on this. It's always harder to do, but you can. Again, difficult if you don't have confirmed officials in senior positions, et cetera. So what do I think about the overall step? If it were part of a larger strategy aiming at the Iranian economy, that'd be great. It may be good even without that, assuming, again, we try to backfill there. You know, what suppliers does IRGC use? Are any of them out of Europe, East Asia, somewhere we can get at? Because given the choice between U.S. markets and the Iranian markets, U.S. markets are going to win that one. So we could, ex post facto, I think, develop an economic squeeze strategy that could affect the overall Iranian state and their support for militias and so forth. Another point here. Iran has a lot of resilience, in part because they have a two-pillar system of governance. You got the president of Iran, his cabinet, the regular Iranian military forces. Over here, you have the supreme leader, the IRGC, the Basij, the militias formed in the Iran-Iraq War, and a subset of IRGC, the Quds Force, which is their external operations element, which has done us a lot of grief and damage. Running two parallel governments has given them resilience, but it also costs them a lot of money, of which they have increasingly less. So let's take a look at these structures. Let's take a look at how they're wired into the world economy, and let's go after it, piece by piece. Get the supply, tell the suppliers we're going to sanction them. All of that takes a lot of forensic work by a lot of people who unfortunately are not present because they haven't been put forward for positions. I keep coming back to that. The bureaucratics of foreign policy actually are important, and this would be a case. So I'd like to think that this all started from a coherent strategic outlook. I don't think that's the case, but I don't think it's too late to start to put it together ex post facto.
I think they have more strategy on this bit of the Iran piece than you're giving them credit for, actually. On this bit, not on the larger stuff, but on this bit, I do. But I'll tell you that later.
So one of the bureaucratic processes we have here is trying to end on time. So unfortunately, I'm going to have to bring this conversation to a conclusion for this evening. But please join me in thanking Ambassador Crocker and Danny Pletka for a terrific conversation. Thanks.